Uh, Item 1 on the agenda are the minutes. To approve the minutes of the Oath and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 24th of May 2024. Are you all content and in agreement with that, please? Yes? Thank you. Thank you for that. Item 2, apologies. Carol, do you have any apologies?
Chairman, I've received apologies from councillors H. Adams, Chapman, Duncan, Bond, Merrick, Nelson, Spruce and R. Perry.
Thank you, Carol. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, then let's move on. Item 4 on the agenda is the local transport plan, which is a presentation of Staffordshire County Council. And I know we've got Nicola Swinderson here, fighting a lone battle on her own.
Yeah, apologies that Dave hasn't made it. I'm hoping he still might come. But if not, you just have me, so apologies for that. And Annette is going to be my Debbie McGee. And Preston, thank you. Okay, so thank you ever so much for inviting me. I'd like to talk about the emerging local transport plan for Staffordshire. I'd like to describe what it comprises of, what the vision and objectives and policy areas that we're looking to include within it, and what are the principles that we're going to follow in identifying schemes to be included in the local transport plan. And then finally, I just want to touch on how this new local transport plan differs from the existing local transport plan. I might say LTP rather than local transport plan. It's just a bit shorter, if that's okay. So an LTP is a statutory document that all highway authorities have to produce, and it sets out what it intends to do in terms of walking, cycling, bus travel, rail, freight and car-based travel, as well as how we are going to manage and maintain the highway network. The existing local transport plan was produced in 2011, so it is very much out of date. In 2011, we weren't using the internet as much as we were. We hadn't done Brexit and all things like this. COVID also had a massive impact. So we're at a stage now where we really need to update that local transport plan and make it more reflective of existing times. The Department for Transport normally produce guidance for local authorities to follow when producing their local transport plan. They haven't done that yet. They produced some draft guidance about 2 years ago, and then it was imminent, and it's been imminent ever since. We're hoping now that the election is over that we should be getting some guidance very soon. But despite the fact that we haven't got any guidance, it's still very important that we produce a local transport plan. It's important for you as councillors to be able to tell your residents what the county council plans to do. It's important that we can apply for future funding, and to do that we need to set out what our policies and objectives are. And it also is very a valuable document when district councils are producing their local plans, because it obviously informs where development can and cannot go. So the local transport plan is split into two documents. The first one is the main strategy document, and this, as I say, it covers all policies relating to walking, cycling, wheeling, shared travel, rail, car-based travel and freight. And that's freight on the roads as well as freight on rail, and together with the management and maintenance of local roads and footways. The long-term strategy document has a timescale to 2050, and the reason why we've chosen that timescale is that is when the UK economy has to be decarbonised, and that includes the transport sector. So we have chosen 2050 as our long-term sort of deadline by when Staffordshire's transport network needs to be carbon neutral. In addition to the long-term strategy, we also have a short-term implementation plan that will be updated every year. This is actually going to set out the schemes that we're planning to implement in the short term. And again, it will be updated regularly in light of existing funding. As well as those two documents, the LTP also has a number of themed documents that sit underneath it. So you can read some of those on there. There's one about electric vehicles, one about freight, one about the bus service improvement plan, which we actually launched about 2 months ago. We're going to have one on highway maintenance and about the assets on the highway and the condition of those highways. So it is quite a large document, to say the very least. It's worth pointing out that we plan to have this document in a draft form by the end of this calendar year, with the idea of it being published by the end of the financial year, so by end of March next year. Okay. Oh, you see, my Debbie McGee's letting me down. You only need to press down or up or left or right. There we go. So the vision for the local transport plan is a net zero transport system that supports sustainable economic prosperity, healthy, safe and inclusive communities, and excellent quality of life for residents, while seeking to enhance the built and natural environment. I think really it hopefully includes everything that we want to include in the local transport plan, and also shows the impact that transport can have on people's quality of life. These might well be tweaked going forwards, but we think probably this is the vision that's most likely to stay. But go on to the next slide, please. So we are determining what goes in the local transport plan by our guiding principles, and we have two guiding principles. All schemes put forward to go into the implementation plan must tick one or both of these guiding principles. So the first one is about promoting high quality, prosperous places that puts people first. So what we don't want any longer really is for the car to dominate, and that we design things around the car. We really need to be putting people at the beginning, people at the fore, and it's about including the flow of people around our centres. So we want to see more people walking and cycling. The other guiding principle is reducing the dependency on petrol and diesel vehicles. So as you all know, we'll certainly be banned, soon to be banned from buying petrol and diesel cars, and we'll all probably have to switch to electric vehicles very soon. So this local transport plan just reinforces that aim. How we're going to achieve that is on the diagram showed here. So there's 3 ways that we would like to meet our vision. The first one is about deterring travel in the first instance. What we now have is, most of us now have the internet. Most of us probably buy a lot of things off, I don't know, Amazon or something. So we don't actually physically need to go somewhere to satisfy our needs and to get access to services. I mean, COVID did actually show us that we could teach our children and that we could get doctor's appointments online, and a lot of that has carried on. The other thing is a lot of people now work from home, and our travel patterns have changed considerably since COVID. So what we would like to use is that digital connectivity to support people to access services without actually needing to leave home. And then the second one in the deter motorised travel is looking at the spatial planning system and land use planning to see if we can put services closer to where people live. And in so doing, that will encourage more people to walk and cycle to work, to the shops, because they're actually within walkable or cyclable distance. And I don't think that necessarily happens. And that will take generations to do. But I think we need to set that out now, as that is our, one of our principles to deliver. So going on to switch. So this is where we want to encourage more people to switch from away ideally from single occupancy petrol and diesel cars, and look at more alternative, more sustainable forms of travel. So for shorter journeys, that would be walking and cycling. For medium-sized journeys, that would be maybe bus travel and rail. But then for rail, that would be for the longer journeys as well. We also want to look at the freight industry and look at their first and last mile, which we know creates a lot of congestion and poor air quality, and is also contributing to the emissions of CO2. And then finally is the improve. This is where we want to say, okay, well, we've tried to encourage everybody to not travel. We've also tried to encourage them to switch. So what else can we do to improve the transport network? So one is about ensuring that we've got enough EV charging points across the county to encourage more people to switch. There's something about efficient driving techniques and about autonomous vehicles. Most of our cars now have some form of automation, that they do things for you. I had a car that actually reverse parked itself. I never actually tested it, but it did say that. The other thing is how we operate and manage the highways. So, for example, when we're filling in potholes, how much CO2 does that produce? And are we using and maximising the use of recycled materials? When we're programming traffic lights, are we ensuring that they are more dynamic and can change throughout the day depending on traffic flows? So when you get to the traffic lights, there's more chance of them being green, and so you're carrying on your journey and it's more of a smooth journey. Oh, and then the other thing, sorry, is behavioural change. Because actually, we can't carry on doing what we've always done, and we do need to change the way that we travel, the way we think about travel. And behavioural change is going to be a massive piece of this local transport plan, because what I've outlined there is what I have written in every local transport plan for the last 20 years. But this time we're saying we're in a climate emergency, and we do now have a target of 2050 to be net zero. So that behavioural change is really, really important. So these are the policy areas that we're looking at adopting. These are based around that diagram. So we've got one about place and place making, giving control back to people and less control or less power or impact that the car has, increasing digital connectivity, increasing the use of digital means, and then one about the physical environment. So what can we do to encourage active travel and personal mobility? What can we do to improve public and shared transport? I know in Stafford that we trialled a scooter scheme. And more in our cities and our main towns, we're now seeing scooters being used. Is that something that we can think about rolling out throughout the county? We need to manage car use, and we need to work with the districts to do that. We also need to manage the movement of commercial vehicles. 20 years ago, commercial vehicles were mainly HGVs, but now what's causing the issues are the huge amount of white vans that are delivering all our parcels to our door every day, and sometimes multiple times a day. And there's a lack of coordination within the freight sector or the private industry to consolidate those journeys. There's something about the operational efficiency of the highway, and that really comes back to us about how we manage and maintain that highway, how we can adopt digital connectivity as a way of managing and easing traffic flow. I've mentioned highway maintenance, and I've just doubled up because now I've just mentioned about technology too. And then the final one, promoting zero vehicle emissions. We have to encourage more people to move to electric to vehicles or to move to sustainable modes such as walking, cycling and bus travel. We can't all just say, well, it's okay as long as, I'll keep my petrol car and as long as other people do their bit, that's okay. If we all move to electric vehicles, we still wouldn't be doing enough. We have to reduce the amount of travel, and we all have to switch at the same time. And then behavioural change, which is going to be the hard bit and is going to be generational. Okay, the next slide, please. If you remember the diagram with the behavioural change circle around it, one thing I'd like to emphasise, and it's come up at the previous meetings that we've had with the district council, it is not a one size fits all. So we appreciate that actually providing a bus service throughout the whole of South Staffordshire will be very difficult and probably won't be a possibility only on our main routes. But what we could do is, can we work to increase digital connectivity and the use of digital means? Can we look at alternatives like car sharing schemes? Can we look at demand responsive transport services and taxi buses? Could we even look at taxis themselves and bring back the voucher scheme that you used to have? It is not that the diagram of deter, switch and improve will not be implemented the same across the whole of the county. We will look at each settlement and decide how best to implement those 3 pillars. And this is the final slide, you'll be pleased to know. And this is just a bit about how this local transport plan will differ from the previous local transport plans. Transport planning as a theory, I suppose, has moved on since we produced local transport plans 20 years ago. Now what we used to do was look at transport growth and forecast that growth, and then ensure that we created a highway network that supported that growth. Now what we're doing is saying, well, what's the vision? What do we want it to look like in 10, 20, 30 years time? And then ensuring that the traffic and highway network meet that vision. So it's called vision-led transport planning rather than growth-led transport planning. A big thing for this local transport plan is we will be seeing less road building, less work on the highway. It will be more smaller schemes that are aimed to promote walking, cycling and bus travel. The dominance of the car will have to retract a little. That's not to say that the car won't be dominant. It always will in Staffordshire by the makeup, but can we encourage more people to use it differently and use it less and use electric vehicles instead? And then finally, I'm going to say this because Kelly's sitting at the back and she's not concentrating on what I'm saying, is we need to work better with our district councils, and that when we are planning and when we are putting developments in, that they are done in sustainable means, and that we work together to ensure that where development goes in, that we can provide an alternative to private motor cars. And I think I'd like to end it on that one. Thank you.
Okay, Nicola, thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions, please? Councillor Yancey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for that presentation. It's really informative. And actually, it's the final point that you made there that I didn't realise you were going to make. That it really is what I want to focus on, and that is this idea of shaping transport infrastructure to meet the demands of development. Now, we're having this discussion in my village at the moment. We have 2 developments likely to be coming along at some point on a side of a village that is unserviced by, generally speaking, by public transport, by bus transport. Now, as it stands, that's just an example. I don't want to focus on the specifics really, but how, as members, do we better influence that to ensure to gain alterations to routes or to gain additional services? And especially considering, I mean, certainly in South Staffs, certainly in my area, we're currently served by Travel West Midlands. It's the West Mids Authority services, who have previously said, well, they only come through our little part of the world because they have to get to where they're going in the rest of the West Midlands. We're having to, it feels like we'll always have to fight with that attitude to get improvements to where we are. Where does this all fit in? Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's the reality of it. So back to the development piece is we need to, right at the beginning of when a proposal's put forward for new houses or whatever it is, that you and us, we talk to the developers and ensure that they are putting in the infrastructure if infrastructure is needed, and that they put money aside to run buses. And it might only be for, say, a year, but they can do that. We can do that as part of the planning application. And what would be really good is if they can introduce bus services, is they do that as soon as that first house is occupied, because there's no point waiting for all the houses to be occupied and then put it on, because by that point, they've already got ingrained their travel habits. I think in terms of, it's a bit unfortunate nature of South Staffs about how it is close to the conurbation. And I think that will always be a difficulty, to be honest. And I think it's Staffordshire, because it doesn't have one centre. At least down here, you have got a centre, it's just out of the county. But you'll always be second fiddle, because they'll want to facilitate and improve accessibility within their area. And that's where the bulk of people are going to be. The passengers are going to be there. You can live in Wolverhampton without a car. You possibly can't in some areas of South Staffs.
Thank you, Councillor Hopple.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on the planning part and having developers funding the infrastructure that county has, does that have an impact? I guess this is more for our planning team to answer. Does that have an impact on the viability of the site from the business, from the developer's perspective, and therefore other policies such as like our green infrastructure policies may take a hit? And actually, should the county just be supplying bus routes if bus routes are needed?
Absolutely. So if there are issues in terms of that, and in terms of key transport infrastructure, that would have to be all weighed in terms of the balance, in terms of viability, and potentially, because of the issues Nicola set out, could have issues in terms of viability and long-term viability of the sites. For the local plan, what we've looked at is the delivery plan, which has set out a whole host of things that we believe are appropriate and a policy to make essential to make development acceptable. Beyond, over and above and beyond that, obviously then there would be a hit on development. So we need to have that broader conversation. Obviously, the policies that we have try to make it so that development is in the most sustainable location. So strategically, that's where we've tried to locate developments appropriately in that strategic framework. But obviously, in a district like ours, they're not always going to be able to be that accessible, and new provision, as Nicola says, is going to be expensive.
Just going back to your point about should the council just not provide it, the bus services? Yeah, so we do have an obligation to put on socially necessary transport. And in Staffordshire Moorlands, we've done this by having a dial-a-ride scheme. That dial-a-ride scheme is so expensive, we could almost pay for people to have taxis. That's the reality of it. We don't have, we have a duty to our taxpayers, don't we, to ensure that we spend their money wisely. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people in rural areas have a car, and it's those small minority of people that we need to cater for. And I wonder whether we need to make it even more personal for the individual. So we're only providing transport to the individuals that need it, and we're not providing it for everybody. And that would therefore be more economic. The situation in Staffordshire Moorlands is we're paying a huge hefty subsidy per passenger. And so we've got to think of something different here. I mean, I quite like the idea of, years ago you used to have your taxi tokens. You pay your gardener with them and stuff. Well, and it was abused, but now we've got the technology, so it shouldn't be abused. So can we look at a scheme like that, and we can actually then focus on the individuals that need it, and also put money back into your local economy, because you'll be using local taxi companies.
Councillor Cope.
Thank you. I've got two questions. My first one, I was involved in the inquiry on the M6, M54 link road. And by the way, have you any lobbying skills to get this road built? Because we're now being told it's going to be delayed by another 2 years. We badly need that link road in my area. But my question actually is, whilst I was on the inquiry, there was talk about cycling and walking routes, and I noticed it was on your slide, cycling and walking infrastructure. Now, the West Midlands have got a dedicated cycling route right across their area, but on the inquiry, it seemed to stop in my area at Ilton, and we didn't seem to have any joined up thinking of where these cycling routes were going to get through Staffordshire. Can you answer questions on what's our plan on that infrastructure? Are we providing these cycling routes? Because traffic's getting worse and there needs to be more safety for cyclists. I'll ask my second question after this one. Thank you.
Set a target for half of all journeys in our towns and cities to be walked and cycled by, I think it's something like 2026, I want to say. I don't think London does that. I think we have a real difficulty with encouraging people to walk and cycle in a county that is predominantly rural and where distances are so long and where people haven't got the mindset to walk and cycle. We are putting together a local cycling and walking improvement plan as part of the LTP. The issue that we have on this for you is that focuses mainly on our towns and larger villages. So I think CODS, I don't actually think we've got a village that's included within South Staffs within that, because again, it's all about value for money. The price of cycle lanes is hugely, hugely expensive. And to get funding for them, the Active Travel England want us to put in segregated cycle lanes. Well, we don't have the space in Staffordshire to have segregated cycle lanes. We don't have the space in our towns because they're all built up to the carriageway. And then in our rural areas, there's hedges in the way. And that they need to be compulsory purchased. So it's a real challenge, but it is something that we are going to have to deal with because we need to get more people walking and cycling.
And any comment on the link road?
No. It's only because I don't know, not because, you know. I'll take it back.
Okay, the second
Oh,
question. Yeah. My second question, you spoke about travel from the final mile, that's distribution. Now, as you know, West Midlands interchange is on the north of the district. I get the logic that this was developed because of taking the haulage traffic off long distance and putting it on the railway line. However, it's now going to massively increase that final mileage where lorries pick up from the warehouses, West Midlands interchange, and deliver locally. Now, when that's fully developed, that's going to have a massive effect on traffic in our area. What's the county council looking at as making sure that the big heavy vehicles are on the right roads and won't be cutting through some of our lanes, etc.? There is a big concern about this, that the volume is going to massively increase. Could I have comments on that, please?
So I'm not directly involved in that scheme, but I understand as part of the planning application that there is a travel plan associated with it and routing schemes. And the reason why it was located where it is so the bulk of journeys can stay on the strategic road network for as long as possible. Do you want to add anything to that, Annette?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add to that. So, yeah, the actual development consent order did allow for obviously routing plans to ensure that the road, that obviously the bigger lorries stay on the right plan, on the right tracks. We're having lots of conversations with the West Midlands Interchange regarding that because it's clearly an issue that's been raised a number of times. One of the things that we weren't really that the West Midlands Interchange companies are really keen to do is in terms of that green freight from so not just in terms of arriving in by rail freight, but also in terms of the lorries that are actually going to be used on in and around West Midlands Interchange being green as well. So there will be some requirements as that as part of their own operating position. So not just in terms of the actual, using the railway line itself. So there'll be more information coming forward as we go along in terms of that. But principally, the right lorries being on the right roads, so they don't clog up the the village roads, is part of the development consent order.
Yeah, very quickly, going over old ground, but when we have accidents on the M6, it throws the area into chaos. It will particularly affect Penkridge because they'll use the 449. So it's a case of us observing what's happening as it gradually is developed. But thank you very much for your answers. Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. I've just got a few questions. So you mentioned a lot of people are now online, but obviously not everybody. We've got quite an elderly population in South Staffs. I'm just interested to understand how we're going to make sure they're included in this and brought along for the ride, if you like, and not excluded, because a lot of them do feel excluded by council services, being online, not having easy access to face, and struggling even with getting through on the phones sometimes. Also, you mentioned you want to encourage people to not travel. Okay, understand that there will be a lot of people who can go online, use Teams, whatever, to manage business and contact. But again, not everybody. But if you do encourage people to not travel, does that not then increase the potential for sedentary lifestyles, isolation, potentially reduction in some shops? And finally, you mentioned, I didn't catch whether you said you trialled the electric scooters somewhere. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Where was it? What happened? What were the outcomes? Thank you.
I'll answer the second and the third question, and then Annette can do the first one. I think, so I've spoken to our people in public health about the impact of discouraging people to travel and accessing services more from home. So doing it digitally and the impact that might have on mental health and that sort of thing. They think it's a balancing act. So whilst we do want to encourage more people to access services digitally, we equally want to encourage more walking and cycling. So it's that balance that we want to develop. So I'm losing my thread a bit here, but we have to get people to travel differently as well. So, okay, if you're going to travel once or twice, or take a neighbour. Don't go in single occupancy journeys and nip out constantly all the time. Because I think that's what people do now. The car is convenient. We all love having the car and going out when we want to. But going forwards, we're going to have to think differently about whether we can do multi-purpose journeys. So when you're going to the doctors, could you also go to the shop and to the pharmacy and wherever else you need to go? Don't just go to the doctors and then come back. So that's what we need to ingrain, and that's about that travel behavioural change piece that needs to be really ingrained. We need to change people's travel habits. The third question about electric scooters, that was a couple of years ago in Stafford Town. It didn't last too long because it was abused by the young people of the town. Now, I think that was because it was a novelty, personally, and I think the more and more towns that get electric scooters, the more of a norm it will be and the less abuse it will be on those scooters. We need to ensure that we've got the right mechanisms, the back office mechanisms in place to ensure that young people can't abuse it.
Is that going to continue? Because I don't think it's yet been brought into law that they're legal. They're still illegal, aren't they?
Yeah, it was a pilot, so we got an allowance to do it. They haven't yet made it law that you can use electric scooters on highways and on private land. You can only use it on private land. You can't use it on carriageways yet.
I come back in relation to the older persons and digital enablement. I think one of the things that's really important is when we did the resident surveys, it's shown that those 85% of people had access to the internet or had access to be able to speak to use somebody who had access to the internet. And I think that's obviously what we're looking to do. I think we recognise though that not everybody does, and our strategy isn't about putting everything online. And some companies, some councils have actually gone so far as to say that they're closing lines, they're doing this, and they're doing literally preventing other forms of access. We haven't done that, recognising that there's the broader strategy. I think it's also important to point out that we recognise that digital enablement is got to be something that we've got to invest in as well. And I mean, Chloe may well talk about this later, but from a digital enablement point of view, and we actually recognise that one of our locality enablers ought to be focused on digital enabling, and therefore is specifically dedicated to be looking at the digital platforms and engaging people in that way. So there will be more to come on that, but also in terms of how we can actually actively encourage and help people to become more digitally savvy as well.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Firstly, the roads are disgusting. The maintenance of them is appalling. My husband used to travel on a motorbike to work for 5 years. He wouldn't even get one out of the garage now. And I would not get on a cycle. And we have a cycle route from Purton that comes to the A41 crossroads. I'm not able to get here by public transport because there's no bus service between the two villages. We have a cycle route that finishes at the A41. No connectivity to our local high school, our leisure services, or this building. So if you want to improve services, you have to improve the connectivity. I have to say to you that the state of the roads and the maintenance of it is highly inefficient. We are looking at potholes continually that are reopening and reopening.
Councillor Allen, we're not
Yeah.
here to talk about the road condition, we talk about the transport.
I realise.
Please.
I'm just expressing my frustration and not having been able to drive and not being able to access this building. I'd like to know whether it's possible to reschedule the maintenance of the highways so that when people come out to look at the potholes, they serve all the potholes in that area so that we're not continually calling them back to the same place.
Councillor Allen, please get back onto the topic, which is the transport.
Okay.
And I understand your frustrations. I know you like to get it off your chest, but let's move on.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we can combine some services. In Scotland, for instance, the postal bus takes people as well as mail. I wonder if we can look at some inventive and novel ways of combining services at times. I wonder if it's possible as well. You're talking about the use of scooters. I think scooters on most of our footpaths, unfortunately, impractical because the footpaths are not wide enough to take a scooter and a pedestrian. So if you were to look at some other kind of non-carbon access for people between villages, are there any thoughts about that do not involve scooters? Most people in these communities are elderly, wouldn't use that anyway. It is the young people exclusively who would use that. And I would point out to you that multiple journeys for older people are not a thing that they can do when they have limited energy. So what are the thoughts about how that is coped with? Because if someone is going to the doctor, they don't necessarily have the energy to go and do their shopping at the same moment. In fact, a lot of people are having their shopping delivered. So how do we combine the delivery services for people when it's all owned by separate firms? If you want to make the efficient use of deliveries to people, then it would be necessary to coordinate with large dealers like Amazon and Hermes and all the others. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Staffordshire used to have Royal Mail buses. 15, 20 years ago, there was one around Eccleshall. I think there was one in Staffordshire Moorlands too. That was Royal Mail's decision to withdraw those. And I don't think there's that many left at all, probably in England now. But that is the sort of thing that we do need to be looking at, thinking out of the box, thinking about doubling up on services. So, you know, you're delivering the mail as well as picking up people. So that is definitely the sort of things we need to be looking at. Other things that we should be looking at where scooters might not be the option is the use of voluntary car schemes and what support we can give communities to either establish or maintain existing voluntary car schemes. And then the other one, I think, is about the taxis. You know, what are we doing to support the taxi sector, to support those individuals that don't have cars or don't use their car as much? Can we ensure that the taxi sector promotes electric vehicles and then they're used more than people using their own individual cars? As I said, one thing I would like to look at is the taxi voucher scheme, because I do think that that is one way that we can support the elderly community in accessing services, particularly hospitals and things like that that are a bit further away. In terms of the delivery services, we do work with some freight operators, and we are looking at consolidating deliveries through what we're calling mobility hubs. So we're looking at these in Keele as a trial to see if we can get more, you know, the Amazon lockers, if we can get things delivered to there and then people will just go to those centres rather than all these individual ones going out to everybody's home. Also, we want to encourage people to, you know, when you order something from Amazon and they can say, could you wait an extra day and we'll bring them all in one go? So just incentivising that sort of buying would be another way that we could do this. So I appreciate that probably not the answers, and I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And we need to be thinking out of the box as a county about how we do it. And I think we still always tend to go back to buses and cars and the usual.
Councillor Harper-Wallis.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go back to the comment that was made that we don't have enough space for cycle paths. In particular, the A449 is extremely wide. It's a really wide road and it's above regulations. In some cases, it goes up to 4 lanes. And so with the new developments that are coming out in potentially the emerging local plan, there's a lot of housing that's going to be there and there's a really good opportunity. And I think that kind of segues into my second theme about this disconnected feeling that this members may have in this council between the county council and the district. I'm on the planning committee, and often when we're reviewing a planning application, members will come with highways issues, but often the comments that are left are just no comment. And there's some serious concerns that members have. So again, it's just highlighting the disconnect between those two, I guess, departments or areas. And again, looking at this kind of larger piece, looking at the guiding principles, you've got deter and switch. Well, we've already talked about digital connectivity. We're in South Staffordshire, we're an ageing population. There are less people online as we go on and through the years because they're getting older. The spatial proximity, well, we just don't have the space in some of the villages, especially in my patch, to put services. And then that goes on to the fact on the switch side, walking and cycling, some of the villages that I represent don't even have pavements. So, you know, there's, again, in this thing, it's talking about improving that, but there's no opportunity there. Rail, only a few of our villages have that. Buses we've talked about today don't have buses. So already I've picked, half of the things in the guiding principles that don't really apply to South Staffordshire. So would the council potentially commit to having a review about rural districts and having a transport plan for rural rather than trying to make this one fit all? Why don't you develop a plan that works for us, really?
This isn't a one size fits all. If you remember the map I showed you of Staffordshire, the different colours on it, that is a map showing different areas, capability to move towards sustainable travel. And you'll find that the lot of the green areas, which is mostly South Staffs and the rural parts of the county, and this is where the car is likely to remain a dominant mode of transport. So we need to be encouraging electric vehicles, but also we need to be looking at, as I said before, voluntary car schemes and taxi operators to see how they can support and backfill where people don't have access to a car. But it certainly isn't a one size fits all.
I just ask, please, that the key for that map is unreadable even on our computers. When I've loaded it, it's not easily read. Would you sort that, please, and let us know?
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Councillor Brindle.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm one of these people that have to travel for work. So my average mileage the last 3 years is about 42,000 a year. So I travel. Poland, they have a bus system. You get on a bus with the token, get off the bus, get on the tram, get off the tram, get on a bus. It's the same as they have in Newcastle, a metro system. Anything like that coming? That's one question. Second question, EVs. I recently looked at buying an EV to keep the wife happy. And then I had to disappoint her because not only did I look at the cost of an EV, I looked at the life expectancy of an EV, and then I looked at the insurance, and then I said no. So that's the second question. The third one is cycle lanes. If you're going to have more cycle lanes, then obviously we need better signage as well, so you can get from A to B, C, D, E, and F. So I think, especially where I'm thinking now, the cycle lane just ends suddenly, and that's it. You've got to get on the road. There's no alternative. Thank you.
I'll answer as much as I can, and then I'll pass on to Annette, who's going to answer some. In terms of the integrated ticketing, the multimodal integrated ticketing, the Department for Transport are currently producing a national scheme. So it'll be like the Oyster card in London. Yeah, so they're hoping to roll that out. I don't know when, but they are certainly putting a lot of effort into ensuring that places outside of London get a similar service in terms of that integrated system. It will only work on buses and rail initially. It won't work on trams and things like that, but you've got to start somewhere. So there is a national scheme that's being developed on that. In terms of electric vehicles, I think we're still quite new in terms of electric vehicles. I think people still have anxiety about them. I think the cost is expensive, but the costs are coming down. I think the technology in the batteries is improving all the time. I think the more and more people that have electric vehicles, the more the technology will improve and the more people will have it. So I think the cost between petrol and diesel and electric will go the other way. And well, soon we won't be able to buy petrol and diesel cars, so we'll all be forced to have electric vehicles or buy second-hand cars. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of the cycling network and it ending and the poor signage. So that's something that we're addressing through the local cycling and walking improvement plan. That's one of the daughter documents that sits under the local transport plan. So that is something that we know isn't particularly good in Staffordshire.
Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chairman. You caught me out there because I know Warren wanted to speak. But I don't know where to start really, and I will try and keep it short. It won't take long to decarbonise the buses because there aren't many in South Staff, so there's a plus, but it's possibly the only plus. There's been a lot of talk about cycle lanes. Unfortunately, you generally encourage people to cycle. They don't cycle on the road, they cycle on the footpath. And as for electric scooters creeping up behind you, and nearly knocking you over, it's an absolute nightmare. So to encourage more people to cycle in this area is, well, I think it's a recipe for disaster. It'd be interesting if you knew how many accidents there were in Stafford Centre with electric scooters, because I know there's been quite a number of pedestrians killed in various areas. And I don't really want to be one of them. I walk my dog 3 times a day on the A460 on the footpath, and it is used as a cycle lane for cyclists and for scooterists. And they have no regard for they don't understand the rules. They're supposed to stop or move, and they couldn't care less. But and I don't want to be one of those casualties, but I reserve my right to walk on the footpath. I'll stop there. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Steele. I think it's more of a comment than a question. So let's move on to Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I think county highways is the biggest issue with residents in most of our areas. And I think we can have an overview and scrutiny session just on highway maintenance alone, to be honest. The highway network is part of the transport plan and it is on the slides for us to discuss tonight. But I'm not going to face that. I want to speak first on the bus service, as a lot of people have. I think this is a bit of a chicken and egg situation in the fact that, and I'll speak for Essington, we have lots of people that can't afford to drive, and they do rely on the buses to get to and from work, mainly across the border in Wolverhampton. The service in Essington is so poor, the vast majority of people that need to use the bus, they walk across fields to neighbouring Ashmore Park, where they can get a bus every 10 minutes. So this means those who can't walk across the fields, mainly the elderly and obviously the more isolated, they're left with a very poor service as not enough uptake to offer anything more substantial. And that's the reason given for not improving services. So many of them end up using taxis. So this gives a false representation of bus users in our village. So how can you account for that in your planning? So that's the first point on buses. I'm trying to take that one first.
So part of the bus service improvement plan that was published about 2 months ago, we have regular contact with all bus operators, including those from outside of the county. We regularly collect patronage data. We collect data on whether buses are running on time, where people are getting on, about real-time passenger information and that sort of thing. I can go back and look at your particular services in Essington and come back to you, because I'm not a bus nerd. I don't know. It's like bingo to me, all these numbers. But there is a serious issue in Staffordshire in that we do have a very skeletal bus service. A bus network has reduced dramatically over the last few years. What bus services we've put on, we only do because we have short-term funding. That's not enough to keep people using it and to keep them on that buses, because they can't guarantee that it'll turn up. And then it ends up being withdrawn because not enough people are using it. It is so difficult. And that's why we need to think about doing things differently. You know, do we have to have buses? Can't we have people carriers? Can't we have the Royal Mail bus? We need to be thinking differently about how we're going to deliver it. Or we can't push our bus operators too much. They are very limited in what they can do. They don't have the drivers, they don't have the capacity. It's a very difficult situation we've got.
Then just to come back on that, then obviously you said a few times like, about it being an individual approach across the plan, and I think you will need more regular engagement with us on the front line in our areas as the eyes and ears to feed back to you about the specifics in those individual areas to inform your individual plan. So I assume more of this county, district, even parish level communication will be happening on the plan. But the second point I wanted to raise is regarding car journeys, and I'm sure most areas suffer from issues, and that's around school traffic and parking. It creates huge volumes of traffic in our villages, and many not suitable to cope, and there's quite dangerous situations around schools. So you've noted a few times today that there's going to be a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Is there any extra focus in that provided around improving walking and cycling, specifically around schools as a starting point? As in my view, that has the high potential to have a wider positive impact. The cycle lanes that end nowhere don't benefit anyone, as other people have said, whereas cycle routes directly to improve access to and from schools, especially high schools where often people have to go between villages. I think we'll have a much better uptake and positive impact overall.
Just going back to your first question on buses and about the need to have better dialogue, we are going to create a Staffordshire Bus Users Forum. So it might be worth us letting you know when that becomes established so you can send a representative. And then we can actually get to the nitty gritty of talking about specifics. And we do hope that that will include bus operators on there as well. My understanding is that every school actually has a travel advisor from the county. We have different officers covering different patches. So if you could let me know which schools specifically they are, I can take that back. Because my understanding is most schools have been assessed now in terms of how children can get there for walking and cycling. So it could be that something's been, that they just physically can't do what they need to do. I don't know. But if you could let me have those details.
Okay, just moving on. People have indicated they want to speak. That's fine. I don't want anybody really to indicate again they want to speak. And it's getting a bit monotonous if people keep going through the meeting and then chipping back in later on. At the beginning of the meeting, if you've got something to say, then I'm more than happy to take the questions. I've got 4 people who wish to speak, and after that, I'm going to close it down. So can I have Councillor Sutton?
Thank you for your presentation. It's been a really interesting debate, and I think it needs to be widened in a different forum, perhaps. There's a phenomenal amount of councillors here who represent, like myself and my colleagues, an area that is nearly all green. I think we've got a touch of yellow, but all of our area is green. We are aware of villages who are desperate for public transport schemes of some description, who have not seen a bus in 40 years. We have a fantastic voluntary car scheme in our particular village, main village, that has been running for the last 25 years and is slowly starting to die a death, I suppose, is the best way. And that's not because the drivers themselves are getting older and there are no younger replacements for them. I think I welcome a lot of the conversation that you've had, but I think it would be more beneficial, certainly for this area and the issues for all of the councillors here who are representing the rural districts, to have perhaps a conference with you and give you the feedback as been indicated by Councillor Harper-Wallis and Councillor Fisher, so you can actually take that back and develop a far more overreaching local transport plan. Because at this moment in time, the local transport plan that you are presenting us tonight is fantastic for urban areas. Sadly, it is not relevant on so many fronts, has been indicated by a lot of our councillors, for rural areas. And we need to have that say. We need to, as you said, think out the box. It's not one size fits all. But at this moment in time, the LTP that you're presenting to us is very much one size fits all. I'm looking at page 6 of the docket, and I also go back to page 4 of the docket, where we talk deter, switch, and improve. And none of these things are relevant unless we can do something for the rurality of our district. And so I urge you to suggest that we have a conversation with representatives from the rural areas. You talked about is it Eastmorelands or wherever, who have issues around the dial-a-ride. Let's think outside the box. Let's have a conversation, and let's put some input and some meat onto the bones of your LTP, which at the moment isn't relevant, or a lot of it, to this rural district.
Just could I come back on that? Part of the LTP, each of the districts in Staffordshire will get their own mini LTP. So you will have something that's just for South staffs. So it'll set out what the issues are and what are the schemes that we're looking to implement. So I take your point that the LTP, the big strategic document, probably it means something for everybody, isn't there? But actually for South staffs, you will have your own LTP. It'll be it's called a district transport strategy, and we produce that alongside the district council.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. It's been suggested, somebody's whispered in my ear, that we'll obviously be talking about very local issues to individuals, and that we should perhaps put on a workshop where you can input your own individual problems within your area. So with that in mind, Councillor Hopper Morris, Councillor Adams and Councillor Dufty, are you prepared to go down that route? Yeah, okay.
Just one question I would like to ask, Chair. Anchorage Railway Station. We recently had trains cut in the number that were stopping at Penkridge. We had to fight to get them reinstated, which we did. They are significant movers. What is going to be your relationship with the new government in relationship to them expanding services so that people can actually use the trains, which is what you really want?
I am a jack of all trades. I am not a master of none. So in terms of this workshop, we can get a specialist to talk about rail, to talk about highway maintenance and talk about the buses. I can only talk in generalities. But with regards to improving rail services, the train operating companies have a hierarchy of train stations that they want to invest money in and invest money into the train services. From memory, Penkridge isn't on that list of priority ones.
We're going to be taking a significant number of houses.
I think actually I heard somebody say that since COVID, Penkridge is the one that has, I think it's Penkridge and Cannock, are the rail stations that actually now have more passengers than they did pre-COVID. So that obviously will help fight for any improvements you want to have made.
Okay, well, certainly we've, I think, taken a lot of Nicola's time. She's done her very best to answer your questions. And therefore, Nicola, can I thank you for attending tonight and for fending all these questions. And I know it should have been a double act tonight, and you're on a solo, but there you go.
I've been let down. Typical.
I know. But thank you very much for coming in. Moving on now to item 5, the council local plan indicators. And I believe Councillor Lees wishes to present this.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members. The purpose of this report is to share with members the proposed new local indicators for the council plan 24-28. The introduction of the new council plan 24-28 presented the opportunity for the council to develop new local indicators to measure the performance against the 4 identified priorities in the plan. The new suite of indicators has been designed so that we can demonstrate our performance against our 4 council priorities. In order to develop the indicators, we have worked with a new local public service think tank as part of the project. We held various focus groups with members, staff and residents. These indicators will evolve over time and we'll be looking for further engagement with our residents during this first year. It is proposed the local indicators will be reported through the Council's Integrated Performance Manager framework. Alongside the indicators, we have required a new report from Oflog. This report will produce quarterly and report to the RNS at half year and end of year. These indicators are being set for 24-25 annually reviewed. So I'll now ask Jackie and Chloe to go through the details. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Good evening, members. Just really a quick introduction, and Chloe's going to take you through just some of the highlights, some of the new style indicators that we're proposing to you tonight. I think it is that whole change of direction in terms of that we want to move towards much more of a narrative so that we can show that onward movement and show that progress over it as a direction of travel. As we know, the council plan is over a 4-year period, so it is much more about that narrative which has more meaning, but importantly what we've tried to focus on is indicators that will have more meaning towards our communities, and we did do some workshops with them to actually identify the areas that were important to them. It is a massive change of from the traditional style, but we feel that actually this is a move in the right direction, and certainly some feedback that we've had from New Local is it's something that they are going to be sharing with other authorities who are also talking to them about how do we change the narrative and that conversation. So very much for us this is about, these will evolve over time, but certainly wanted to share that with you as hopefully a new way and a new approach, and certainly something that we will look to develop as we go along, rather than having it for the life of the 4 years of the plan. We'll look to actually develop them, but I'll get Chloe to pick up on the specifics.
Okay. So good evening, members. As mentioned, really having the new council plan provided us with an opportunity to look at the indicators, you know, that we've been working with certainly for the last 4 years, and how we measured and reported that performance, you know, internally through IPM, but also to our communities. The leaders picked up on this, but I think it was an important element of the piece of work that we did, was involving New Local, like I say, who are a think tank. And as part of that project, and this was really useful in the discussions that we've had internally, and obviously with yourselves through the member working groups, but how we develop these, so, you know, working with our members, working with staff, working with residents. I think those focus groups kind of really pushed the conversation on. And I think it's also fair to say that sometimes the conversations were quite difficult because we really were thinking differently to how we'd previously approached our performance. So again, it has been mentioned, but the proposed local indicators, we will report them through the council's integrated performance management framework. And again, as part of this piece of work, we've looked at that as well. So when you see the framework, that will look and feel quite different again to mirror the work that we've done on the indicators. In the table that you've had attached as part of the covering report, again, I think one of the key differences to point out is you can see that the measures that we're using now will be reported against the 4 priority areas. So previously, when you've received performance information, it's been very much service orientated, and this is still service orientated, it's just around the 4 priority areas. So once approved, obviously the new indicators will be introduced and reported through the IPM, with the intention being at, you know, half year, end of year. And the other important thing to say as part of this session is that we are looking to review these indicators annually. So again, previously we've set indicators for a 4-year spell, and sometimes that probably hasn't served us as well, but at least now every 12 months we can reflect, and there will be some measures that we'll want to take forward, but there'll be others that will think actually we've concluded that measure and we can introduce something new. So again, just referring to the table attached, and I think one of the examples, again, you'll see some of them will be annual, some of them will be quarterly, but one of the examples will be things like the resident survey. So as part of the narrative that Jackie mentioned, we won't just cover the annual resident survey, we can cover some of those other consultations we've had with our residents throughout the year, and they'll be service specific. And I think most of you will probably be familiar with the waste you know, service consultation that's happening at the moment. And we can pick all that up as part of the narrative as we go on. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Allen.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see this in the table. Is that going to go with an action plan with dates with it? We're talking about some being 12-month initiatives and some being 4 years. And I think it might be helpful for us to see where you're regarding it as a long-term thing or a short-term. And then what's to be rescheduled to fill the gap is one question. And I want to welcome the focus on residents and how we engage with them, because I think that's the critical matter really for all of this, as we found with the waste contract. As you know, the communications work group was working very hard to try and think how to engage everybody. And it is a matter really of us giving some deep thoughts to social media and the way in which we approach the younger generations. Because it always seems to me it's the older generations who are picking these things up and running with them. My other thought is periodically whether we produce some kind of publication that is delivered to homes. I know this has been a sore point for a long time now, but I'm very much aware with the number of elderly residents here increasing, we do hit this barrier. Most of them will not engage in social media in the way in which the younger people will. Thank you.
Was that more of a comment than a question?
I'm just asking if these matters are going to be addressed. Okay.
Certainly, yes. So, like I said, it's definitely our intention to review these indicators. I think not setting them for the four-year period gives us that flexibility as we go forward. You probably notice, and sorry, this is remiss of me, in the table you've got all the work that we've done over the last few months, and you've probably noticed that some of it, I think, is in green font, and you're probably thinking, what's the green font? So some of the measures that we talked about as we were developing this particular suite, we knew weren't quite what we'd call oven ready, but we saw that they were emerging as well, and I think that covers some of your point. I think around comms, absolutely right, how we, because for us internally and for yourselves, we've got the IPM, haven't we? So we know how we report information. And I think certainly the comms team will be on board when these reports go live and how we get that information out into our communities, and that it's relevant and timely as well, you know, when we do it. So yeah, certainly part of this project going forward.
Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I recognise the amount of work that's gone into this, which is obviously substantial. And I think it's, from my perspective anyway, seems a very good way forward. But I'm going to say something which you've heard me say before, I'm sure, which is just really a plea that could we have some sort of comparative data where it's available included in it. I know we've talked about this before, and it's something that I think you were agreeing that you would try and do. It's just obviously it's not represented in this document, and I think that is important. Clearly, it won't be appropriate for all the indicators, and obviously, to some extent, it's an inward-facing document because it's looking at our own priorities. But some of the data that you're talking about there will be available for other areas as well. And just making sure we include that, I think, would be really helpful, just so that we can see how well we're doing. Thank you.
Certainly, really good point. So, what's not part of this table, but you have seen previously, is the requirement for us to report on the off-log measures as well, and those indicators. And again, going forward, as we understand at this particular point in time, that requirement will still happen. In fact, we had communication from off-log prior to the election that there'd be potentially more indicators that they would be asking us to measure. Now, being honest with you, you've absolutely recognise these are quite internal. The off-log indicators and measures which we've reported for years, we can more easily do those comparisons for you, and we'll do. It's press of a button, that one, so yeah, much easier. But there are elements of these as well that we can do that with.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further questions? No? In that case, there is a recommendation at 8.1 that members review and agree the suite of local indicators 2024. Are we all content with that, please? Yes. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, creation of open space in development through 106 agreements. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to present this?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. As you're all aware, the provision of open space on residential developments is a policy requirement that's undertaken within planning. We secure this provision through an agreement of the amount of open space and play areas on developments through our planning processes, as you know. The method of delivering open spaces can be quite varied. You'll see that this report, it seeks to ensure that there's flexibility for this council in determining whether to adopt an open space or to require a management company to be set up. And that can be agreed and monitored by this council, all depending on the individual circumstances of the site. With Chairman's permission, I'm going to hand over to Annette and the team, and they can talk you through the detail and take questions before offering you the 3 recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So, as Councillor Wilson said, that the methods of agreeing open space provision are set out in planning agreements, and as you know, these are normally secured through Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act. And what they require is requirements for the provision of open space and play areas to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So that's the policy base for asking for these provisions. These agreements, the Section 106s, need to contain provisions in relation to future maintenance and management of the open space on site, as you would expect. Members will also be aware that often Section 106 agreements in the district have been historically drafted to allow the option of the open space to be laid out and then transferred over to us as a council on completion. And along with that completion and that transfer comes a maintenance payment calculated in accordance with the defined policy criteria to pay for its ongoing maintenance. When this happens, these open spaces become part of the council's assets, and we maintain them and tend to them in the same way as we do other bits of open space that we maintain and tend. And they just become part of the estate that we manage. So by virtue of accepting the open space land and the maintenance payment, the council accepts the liability for the land in perpetuity. However, the financial contribution offered for the maintenance in accordance with those calculations, which are prescribed in the local plan, will only last for a maximum of 15 years. And after that time, the open space becomes a liability and often a financial burden for the council, irrespective of the future identified issues that may arise on the land. And this obviously, and on occasions has consequential implications for service delivery elsewhere. The 15 years, the 15 years is set out in policy, and it is seen as being reasonable and can't be excessive to make the development unviable. Over the years, we have become concerned on some occasions that we are accepting land which has the potential to have a sizable financial burden to the council. And to that end, we've researched that maintenance payments on a number of Section 106 agreements do fall significantly short of the 15-year period due to inherited problems with the open space itself, subsidence, invasive growth, etc., etc. And of course, factors beyond the council's control, such as cost inflation. There are instances where the contributions can last only 2 years before they begin to become a burden on the council's finances, and this can leave a significant financial shortfall impact on council resources. So looking forward, it's estimated that based on expected sites, assuming the local plan that we have now, and those sites coming forward, there are likely to be approximately 20 qualifying sites over the next 10 to 15 years. The report itself does set out some worked up examples and real life examples across the district of this, ranging from various different amounts of time that the will last. Of course, though, there are examples where the costs are appropriate, and whilst the council will have a long-term liability of the land, the length of time the money will last will be longer and therefore would be deemed to be reasonable in those circumstances. Section 106 agreements can also create the option for the council to ensure the delivery and longer-term maintenance of the open space through the creation of an ongoing management company by the developer, which the council approves. Now, liability for future maintenance in these circumstances then rests with the appointed management company, and these arrangements devolve the council of any maintenance responsibility. The development company and the residents then pay an annual charge for maintenance, and this obligation is set out in conveyancing during the property transaction and subsequently when properties transfer and change hands at a later date, so that it is clear to the purchaser at the outset. Officers recognise that there can be instances where issues arise with management companies which can lead to concerns raised by residents, and I've had conversations with many of you about this issue. However, we also consider that the controls put in place through the Section 106 approval process can ensure these concerns can be mitigated. It should also be noted that management companies must be transparent, and they do have statutory and accounting obligations, and obviously are subject to external scrutiny. Leaseholders also have a right to ask the Lands Tribunal to assess whether proposed service charges are reasonable. The principle, therefore, of management companies taking on new open space within developments can be more effective and financially prudent and a less risky method of managing open spaces in the district in the long run. This is on the basis of ensuring the appropriate controls and the council's approval of details on governance and substance of management companies, but also involving annual maintenance returns to be approved by the council, which can be set out in the Section 106 agreements, so creating a much stronger control over these management companies. So this approach that we're recommending in this report this evening outlines proposals, gives the council the flexibility to make the decision to either adopt in some circumstances, and if appropriate, the Section 106 agreements can be worded to give the council the first refusal to adopt the land, but without placing an obligation on the council to do so. So creating that flexibility. There are therefore 3 critical recommendations to this report. Firstly, that members note the report and recommend to Cabinet that Section 106 should be drafted in such a way to give the council flexibility to make the decision, whether it's a management company or inappropriate, and after due consideration, whether we adopt it ourselves, but given the particular circumstances of each particular case. And then secondly, the members recommend to Cabinet that in the event of management companies being considered, the most appropriate vehicle to deliver and maintain the open space, then the Section 106 agreement must require the management company, including their governance agreements and maintenance schedules, so the detail that sets out how they're going to do and manage that open space, they are approved and monitored by the council. And then thirdly, that members recommend to the Cabinet that open space maintenance costs are reviewed to ensure long-term funding of spaces that are adopted by the council. So I hope that's clearly set out what the options are. More than happy to take any questions, and there are a number of officers here as well to have those conversations.
I think Councillor Burnett was first.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Annette. If an existing management company goes into administration, what happens then? Thank you.
There are controls in place in relation to administration, but I'm going to pass you over to Pardip, our legal representative here this evening, who will be able to answer that in more detail.
As far as liquidation is concerned, it's not just a question of whether the management company goes into liquidation. The Companies Act sets out very clear statutory rules as to what actually happens when a company goes into liquidation. And the same rules would actually apply here. So what would actually happen is that liquidators would be actually appointed, and there would be provisions to actually offer a new company to actually take over. The rules are very clearly and tightly actually set out, in statute, which actually applies to management companies and all companies.
Councillor Cope. I'll work my way around, okay.
Toss a coin. Following that answer then, the problem is if it's offered by the administrator to another company, sometimes those companies don't want to take on that financial responsibility. Now, we had this in the cladding scandal, all the houses being cladded after the fire in London. And a lot of these companies existed for a long time, didn't have to pay out. But once the specification on the cladding was pointed out, it was a financial liability, and nobody came forward to take that responsibility on. Now, if this transpires, you could end up with a private estate, or sorry, an estate built, and no one takes the responsibility when they've gone into administration, and then nobody maintains the space, cuts the edges, cuts the grass, and we could be in a right pickle over that. So I'd want better assurance than what you've just said, Pardeep. Thanks.
No, I appreciate the point that you've actually made. I think the report clearly actually sets out that it's a question of balance, councillor, here. That, what we've actually got is a situation where there are large swathes of open space which are being maintained by the authority at considerable expense. The idea now is to actually move forward and have the option to consider, well, should this particular open space be maintained by the council? Is this one where it's an area which is going to be expensive to maintain, and as a consequence of that, it should be managed by a maintenance company? So I understand the concern that you've made. There is actually a risk, but like everything else, councillor, that risk has to be balanced against, well, should a local authority take financial responsibility to maintain every single piece of open space that actually is offered pursuant to the new developments? So, I know you'd like more information, in respect of that. But as I said, this is just a balancing act, rather like the planning applications.
Councillor Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite honestly, this scheme seems to me, to be passing the buck. What you're proposing here is an agreement that any future developments where there are public open spaces, and let's face it, in all estates, you have public open spaces within the planning of the whole area. Now, I think we have at the moment a problem actually adopting land that has been built now for up to 10 years or more, where it has not been transferred into the council responsibility, even when a 106 agreement has been agreed and paid, actually. So it seems to me there are problems this council is having getting currently land into our ownership for maintenance and so on. I know of a case recently, I shall not quote it, but I had a problem from residents about a tree. And it turned out that some 15 years ago, when the estate was completed, only a relative small area, public land, or should have been public land, was not transferred from the developer to this council. And the inquiries and complaints I made to the company, it turned out that initially the company asked this council to take over this particular site, but they didn't get a response from our legal department at the time to take action. Now then, we have a problem concerning this tree, which is more than a nuisance, whereby the company, I won't mention it, fairly big company, has got the responsibility now of actually trying to manage that public open space that belongs to them. That's going to be costly. In actual fact, I found that they do, in fact, maintain the green area themselves on a contract. And when I spoke to the representative of the company, he was quite taken aback that having completed this estate some 14, 15 years ago, they still got their responsibility of maintaining the grassed area, plus an additional problem. So the point is this: are we capable of taking over this land and maintaining it for public use? The comments have already been made about the possible problems that could arise if we did say to a private company, whatever, to put the burden on our future residents in estates, when really we don't do it to any others. So why now are we advocating that we allocate public open space for a private company to manage and our residents to pay the cost of doing so? Doesn't seem right to me.
I think there's a number of points there. In terms of the specifics of that case, then I'm happy to have a conversation outside this meeting. But in terms of the actual process, the way that it should work, obviously, is if all the requirements and the policy requirements have been met, then it should have been, if it was meant to have been transferred to us, then it should have been transferred to us with a financial financial amount of money that would then be offset, and then we would have been doing that. Now, it appears, and again, without having the detail of this case, it would appear that there's been bits of areas that have been on that site that's been done as in that way, and bits of areas that we we look like we're doing that ourselves. So I think in answer to your question, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of, what is it? In terms of, we can do that. Yes, of course, we can take that land on. We can, but we must be absolutely in the understanding that it's going to put a financial burden on the council, and we can't account for that. So we effectively, in some cases, we could be accepting a piece of land that is going to have a financial burden infinitum for a small amount of money that we will then take on. And that's going to have a consequence to the existing areas that we are maintaining, going forward. So that, I think we need to be aware of that, and that's exactly why we're bringing this report to you, for that debate, because we have choices to make. We can accept the land. We can accept the land, and we can accept a financial an amount as well. But also the other option is to, and this is what many other local authorities do, is to transfer to a management company. The council doesn't have doesn't then have that financial burden in the future, and that's a decision that we do have to take as an organisation.
Okay, thank you. Can we get 1 moment? Can we keep ourselves to the overall policy rather than any individual cases? Councillor Harper-Wallace.
Thank you. In terms of the legal advice that you received, Councillor Cope, we can be pragmatic about what would happen if there's an estate in our district that is going ridiculously unmaintained. The residents would be up in arms and we'd be pressured to take it on. Like, that's what would happen. We're in this place because of unforeseen management issues, and that's why the questions come to this council. And in line with the same theme about a management company going insolvent, they would likely go insolvent for the same reasons that we're having this conversation for today, unforeseen management issues. So again, you're presenting a risk, a known risk that has happened to us, and then saying, oh, well, that risk won't happen to the management companies that take it on. And I think there's a disconnect there. So, they're likely to go insolvent, and then we're back in this place that we're at here. It's a shame we're here. We're here because effectively the sums don't add up without double taxing residents, which is just a difficult situation that we've been put into, and that's the past, and it should be resolved for the future. I'm all for flexibility for the council. But if we're looking for flexibility, then could we potentially be looking at actually utilising the SILS scheme, which gives far more flexibility than a 106 scheme, and actually potentially utilising the money from that in revenue generating schemes or projects that can then pay for ongoing maintenance of open space that we then take on. So yeah, a couple of questions. And then finally, just a side question is, what powers do we have to ensure management companies maintain their upkeep rather than it becoming, I mean, I've got a load of residents that have issues with their current management company already, and it gets passed off as a civil matter because you've got to deal with the management company yourself as a resident. So, you know, what powers can we have to enforce through perhaps planning enforcement conditions, things like that on management companies? Thanks.
I'll start that, and I'm going to hand over to Kelly to talk about SIL as well. So in terms of what powers we would have, this is what one of the things that we brought about in terms of this report, is that we would be in the future. Obviously, there's lots of applications that have gone before, and we're dealing with potentially sites that may not have had the strength of the Section 106 that we'd be proposing now. And in that we would be requiring an absolute clarity in terms of the maintenance schedules. We'd be requiring annual maintenance reports, and we'd be asking for annual reporting from the management company to the local authority. So we would have a much tighter control over what the plan was. Those would be had through the planning application process, if that's the route that we ended up looking at. They'd have to be reasonable. And reasonable to us in terms of what we would expect and the level of maintenance that we'd be expected if we were going to do it ourselves. And obviously that has to be reasonable, but that we would be tying that down to the Section 106 and to the condition, so that it would be therefore able to be dealt with on that way. I'm going to hand you over to Kelly to talk about potentially in terms of your potential solution in terms of SIL.
Thanks very much, Annette. I know members have discussed community infrastructure levy a number of times over the years. It's actually now being abolished and changed for something else because it's actually demonstrated over the years to be quite ineffective. We have looked at SIL a number of times to make sure we're going with the approach that's in the best interest of the community, and we would not get as much out of SIL as we would out of Section 106. It's also important to remember, which I know has been an issue for members in the past, is that community infrastructure levy is like a district-wide tax or levy that every new house is put on. So it has to cover everything from health contributions to highways contributions to green infrastructure contributions. And so it's always a cautious approach to top slicing off what that would be. And the figures are always a lot lower than when you take it on a case-by-case basis and actually look at detailed Section 106. It's also as well that it's spent district-wide. So you see in other authorities where they've adopted it, and we're far more bespoke with the sort of the geography of South Staffordshire. But it could be, say, where the large urban area generates the money, but actually the projects that is then chosen to be spent on are in the rural areas. So it's not actually seeing the benefit where the development is. So I think there's a lot of downsides to SIL, and I think that's been recognised by a number of authorities now that have pots of money that are gone unspent because they've not quite got enough to deliver anything meaningful. What I would say is, and what Annette said earlier on, the bit where we've got some real teeth is if we do get first refusal, is there are figures in our site allocations document around grounds maintenance costs. It's within the policy to review those as and when we need to be reflective of those transparent costs. So, if we did have first refusal and it was in our interest to take it on in that specific circumstance, we could get more for it. That would always be better than a SIL approach, which is a much lower, more cautious figure that's worked out.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. It's hard to know where to start, so I have several questions / issues that I'm concerned about with this particular issue. First of all, I think it's worth just saying that I'm very sympathetic to the concept of what's trying to be achieved here. I understand that the fear of risk, which could be very substantial for the council, is most definitely an issue. On the other side, this council exists for the sole reason, and we need to remind ourselves of this, of providing services to the residents. What we're saying here is that for some residents, and only some residents, we won't be providing this service, we're going to outsource it. Now, that may be something that the council decides it's happy to do, but it is distinguishing between different residents who we all represent, and some of them will be effectively being double taxed for the same amenity, because we are not going to be giving them a council tax discount if they are also paying management fees for their local bit of open space. That doesn't seem inherently fair. And in fact, I'm pretty sure it isn't fair by any sensible assessment. But I'll reiterate, I'm sensitive to the issue of why this is being done. So yeah, I guess there's a question is, just confirm, I'm assuming we're not going to be giving a discount to council in council tax to people who are going to be affected by having to pay a management consultancy fee, management company fee. Are we happy that that's the case, that we're going to be effectively double taxing people? And are we happy that we're outsourcing, in effect, something that we otherwise regard as being a standard council function, which is to provide amenities for our staff, for our residents? It's just a real problem, and that really worries me. And I've not heard anything that really nails that and answers that question. Because when we've looked at these figures here about the money that's come in, you haven't added in the council tax contribution from all those people in the area. That's not in the figures. And yet they have been paying that in some cases for a number of years for local amenities, including open spaces. So I'm not quite sure that I fully understand that the figures have been calculated in a way that makes complete sense. Thank you.
Appreciate exactly in terms of what you said, and those are the conversations that we've been having. But I think it's important when you look at it in terms of a development, that development is it tends to be a development, and the open space provided within that development tends to exclusively be for that development and the people involved in enjoying that development. So no more than do we, if somebody who lives in front of onto a main road and has no green space, we don't reduce their council tax because they don't have direct looking over an amenity public space. So I think we need to look at it as well in that context, is that the rest of the district would also be then paying for open space effectively on private land outside the outside the wider area, because there is a specific development within that development, that open space relating specifically to the development and the people that live there.
I'm not sure I entirely understood that. There are plenty of areas that I know of, and we're not going to talk about particulars, where there are open spaces that are looked after by the council that were actually part of an original development in the first place. And yes, they're mainly used by people there, but other people can use them as well. So I wasn't quite sure that I understood why the fact that some people have an open space that's paid for and looked after by the council via their council tax is fair if other people have an open space next to them which isn't, and they have to pay their council tax, which effectively will be supporting other people's open spaces.
I think the danger of going round in circle, but again, take your point entirely. But ultimately, the pot that we have to manage and maintain the open spaces will be finite. The spaces that we're delivering on open space that we have responsibility for is on open public land that provides the benefit, if you like, to the broader population, and not just for that individual development on effectively on a private estate. So ultimately, it's in that on its head. Then the rest of the community are paying for development in a specific location.
I think I can just interject here that we're talking about, it's just historical changes. There is, before us, there are lots of things that have gone on in the past, but we're just looking for a way forward that protects the council's position for the future. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chairman. I think for me, developers are a lot more cooperative at the drafting of the S106 stage when they're still looking for planning permission compared to down the line when they've already got it in place. So I think we need to give serious consideration to making sure we front load as many safeguards as possible into the 106 around this. So I just want to get my head really around a bit more detail on it. So if we required the setting up of a management company, can you specify a structure that company needs to be? Is it just a private limited company? And I think it's dangerous to think that they won't ever go into administration, as we found out with Essendon Cemetery. Obviously, it's very difficult. No one expected that. Can they, administrators, then look to sell off that land as part of their asset stripping, which they're trying to raise revenue? Could they sell potential land to developers for 2 or 3 more houses? Or does the covenants or safeguards at planning permission stage, or S6, prevent that in perpetuity, so that can never happen? So what sort of structure is that company? Is there an element of where it's specified, and what safeguards is there if it did go into administration to prevent the asset stripping for developers, basically? So just take that one first. I've got another one, but just if you answer.
Yeah. I think liquidation of a company is always going to be very difficult to actually account for and manage in a Section 106 agreement. I think the report actually indicates what we're doing on this occasion, and which we haven't previously, is that when the Section 106 agreement is drafted, what we want is a very clear specification as to how the open space is actually going to be managed. But more particularly, what we actually want to do is to approve the management company. Now, by actually having that control, the idea is for the council to carry out a due diligence of that particular company, do some research at the company's house, look at the assets, and actually, look at, how the company has actually, previously managed, other open spaces. As I said, to eliminate the risk of of the company going into liquidation is actually going to be, very difficult to manage. But, we could take some of the points, away that you've actually mentioned in terms of, if the management company does go into liquidation, is there a way around in the Section 106 agreement where we can say that there is a first offer of the land, to the council? I mean, that's something that I'm sort of, thinking aloud and, thinking, well, how will that actually work? But, I potentially see that as a solution because, of course, amongst members, there's a lot of concern about the company going into liquidation. So Annette, Kelly and I, we're all working, very, carefully to ensure that we have got, as much provisions in the Section 106 agreement, which are tightly control the specification, the governance, what is this company, how has it behaved elsewhere. But I'm now thinking, can I actually build in another control, where if it goes into liquidation, there is some provision, I don't know, in the land registry or somewhere, where there is a first offer of that land by the liquidators, coming, to the authority. So that's something I will have to sort of think further about, but it could provide some comfort, to members. As I said, the report is all about, balancing the risk. And the other thing I actually wanted to say is that, personally, as a locum, I have worked in lots of different authorities, and other authorities very comfortably allow management companies to control the land. And this is the first authority that I've actually worked for where members are not comfortable with management companies. And I can understand that, and I think that's because of some of the historical problems that have arisen, because those tight controls in the Section 106 agreements were not in place. So I really understand the uneasiness. But across the board, local authorities up and down the country that I've actually worked for, have no issue with open space being dealt with by way of management companies.
Sorry, can I just come back in as well in terms of that, just that extra level of security is alongside that, in terms of, can it be sold off? Could it be asset stripped? Well, obviously it would be designated as open space within the development. To change of use would need planning permission. The chances are we would allow that planning permission. So it could, if all those issues, if all those things failed, which we would believe that they wouldn't do because of the safety net, we, you know, in terms of its value, would be for public open space because we have the control as the local planning authority. So just to add to that level as well as to what Pardip said. Sorry, I interrupted you then. Apologies.
No, that's fine. Obviously, I welcome obviously both answers. Looking into that in more detail, I think there do need to be safeguards around liquidation, especially if it's private directors as opposed to a board, things like that. So the second point I wanted to raise is that, and it sort of feeds into that. The recommendation is to draft the S106 in such a way to give flexibility for the council having first refusal to adopt the land without obligation. Could parish councils also be considered as a second refusal for all the same reasons that you've expressed for the council, joining land, etc., before they're mandating as a third option a management company? I don't know if that's been considered. And then obviously, Kelly, you've mentioned costs regarding in our planning policy. Is there any mechanism where that is inflation linked, index linked, etc., over a period of time if we do choose to take on any of this land?
I understand through the chair that it is already index linked, and clearly the parish control element that you have indicated, you know, we're happy to actually look at that to see how that would actually, you know, work. So I do actually understand the point that you've made, and I can talk to Annette, and we're happy to consider that particular aspect.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Smith? Oh, sorry, Councillor Evans. Excuse me, I'm just losing the will to live at the moment, okay.
Yes, might have already been touched on, but just a question on the role of parish councils, because we've got two options on the table. It's either going to be ourselves or a management company, but there is a local point to illustrate this. We've got either ourselves taking the land on or a management company, but in certain bespoke situations, the local parish council may be interested. For example, in Purton, we've had a situation where we've had a new development, 106 money, and we've had allotments put in that are controlled by the parish council. So I just wanted to know, how is that element being considered in the proposals? Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very useful question. And some local authorities do that as an option. I think Stratford upon Avon, we've obviously done quite a lot of research in terms of this, because we recognise the challenges. Hence, that's why we brought this for this, you know, very healthy and rich debate that we're having. I think I certainly don't think there'd be an issue with that. I think I'm more than comfortable for a parish council to take that on and take on those liabilities. Whether they would. Once if they is another matter, and whether you know, if under full understanding of the issues, because I'm no doubt they'd have similar concerns that we may well have, and in some circumstances, as I say, we may well be happy and comfortable in taking the land on ourselves. But I certainly got no issue in terms of conversations with the parish, and if they wanted to take it on, take the liability and take a fee, a sum in response to that, then that can be worked into the proposals through the section 106.
Councillor Brindle, and the night is moving on. Can we try and keep it as brief as possible, please?
Yes, Chairman. Question. Section 106, legally, when a developer says he's going to do something and he doesn't do it, I found that the legal department haven't got the teeth to follow through with this section 106, i.e. if a builder says he won't sell no houses till it's all complete, and then as soon as the first house complete, he sells it and people move in, and we report it, then nothing happens. That's one question. Second question, as a businessman, small businessman, I can't see this, you're not selling this very well with the management committee to me, because basically you're asking the management committee to do something that, in my opinion, we should be doing in-house. And to do it in-house and then to make a management committee comply with so many rules and regulations, you're putting more expense onto a management committee to comply with your rules and regulations. First question. Second question. So,
I think I'm going to hand over to that side of the table to answer the first question. But in terms of the second question, the reason that we want open space, though, is to make the development acceptable. So we are asking for appropriate development, to have appropriate level of open space for the benefit of the wide of that community. So there's a policy requirement to it to not provide open space would mean that the development would not be as attractive, wouldn't have the amenity, and wouldn't contribute to good placemaking. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want to be in that position. We recognise that creates a burden, though, a financial burden, and that's the point. You're absolutely right. It does create that issue, but we do want that open space to be able to be created for that positive that positive development, because development without open space and without amenity areas and without children's play areas, if that's what's appropriate for that scale, wouldn't be as good without it. I'm going to hand over to Kelly and Pardip to answer the first part of the question.
sorry, Chairman, if I'm out. It's not the open space, it's the costs. Forget the open space. The open space comes with Section 106 agreement. Or is it 1 metre per cubic, whatever, there's a calculation. That's there. It's the maintenance of it. If you're trying to develop a company to maintain it after, then it's got to be a contribution that's going to be viable to the company. And at this moment, you're not certain. No, it's not viable.
Yeah, I'll just pick up the first part of that. And whilst I'm conscious the chair said not to go into specifics, I'm very aware of the specifics that you're referring to in terms of the section. It needs to kind of, because it's about that specific one. We do have a site that has been challenging, and it is an open live enforcement case as well as a Section 106 compliance case. We have to be reasonable. That is what enforcement and negotiation is all about. When you say about the on first occupation, X, Y, and Z needs to happen. Yes, obviously at that point, we will then start to engage with the developer and say, right, you either owe a Section 106 payment, or you need to ensure conditions 3 and 4 are dealt with. There comes a point at which we can't come in too hard at the beginning, otherwise we'll be seen as being unreasonable. The whole process of getting a development to be completed is by negotiation. There does come a point when negotiation breaks down. That's when we serve enforcement notice, and we have done and will do. And the case in point, we have done that on a number of occasions. It is not a great delivery that we've seen there, but it remains ongoing, and we will not rest until it's sorted in line with the Section 106 wording. What I would say in the generality of it is the proposal we're putting forward this evening is to learn from some of those issues we've had historically, to make sure Section 106s and conditions, because they're the two separate sides of this, are robust and clear and have triggers in and set out the expectations so that we can then enforce against those triggers. At the moment, we don't specify what we want a management company to do. We don't specify we want annual reports. We want them to meet certain standards. We want to sign off the maintenance plan. So we're kind of on the back foot. By doing this, we'll have more teeth to make sure things are done when they need to be done, which we don't necessarily have with some of our historic Section 106s of the one we've just mentioned.
Councillor Cope, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I get it that we need to take the burden off the council, and I take Councillor Harrison's balanced view. At the end of the day, though, we still need to protect any of our residents that fall foul of any problems if a company goes into administration. Now, listening to the debate, I take console from Pardip is obviously said she's going to explore whether we can create a safety net in that scenario. Councillor Fisher mentioned it as well. So, as we did with the churches issue, redundant churches, we built up a fund, didn't we, that could fall back on if that was the scenario, that there was a redundant church. If Pardip can use some creative thinking of, let's face it, some of these management companies will survive, not many will go into administration. It's the fact of the few that might. So if Pardip goes away and thinks that through, whether we could have a safety net in that situation, and it might not happen for 10, 15 years. I'm just trying to probe a solution here. Another comment I'd make as well, the controversy with some of the house builders historically in the past with covenants and leasehold, they had an extra management fee that the government has recently removed because it was a burden on people buying leasehold houses. And you've got to be careful of that when it goes to a management. Once it's gone to them, an unscrupulous person could put inflation costs and really ramp up that cost. So have we got any legal requirements if we pass it to a management company that there's a level cost? I don't know, but I'm just brainstorming all of these problems. Can anybody answer any of those, please?
Councillor, is just going to be another point that I will actually have to go away and think about. You know, is it legally possible for, you know, us to specify in the management plan that when the matter is when the land is actually transferred to a management company, you know, to what extent can we control the level of service charges? So there's a lot to sort of, you know, think about here, because, you know, the difficulty that you've got is that once that land has then passed to a management company, in essence, unless the council is actually on the board of that management company, you know, the controls that the council are actually going to have, you know, at arm's length need to be very, very carefully worded and considered. So I can't promise anything, but certainly it's an area that, yeah, you know, we'll have to have a look at. Yeah.
Councillor Harper-Wallis.
Thank you, Chair. In the spirit of brainstorming, you know, we're talking about, you know, this third-party entity that can ruin. It causes a lot of different issues, and we don't really know about it. Well, why don't we be bold? We've got the in-house skills. Why don't we set up our own management companies? If we believe that these schemes are fair and they're fair for residents, we have the in-house skills to do that. These schemes are run at profit, and these profits could be like 20%. We don't need to charge 20%, so we can give value for money for residents. Or we could keep the 20% and then we could utilise it for the open space that we are currently maintaining and have issues funding. So could the council explore potentially setting up their own private company to run these?
Anybody?
Technically, we can operate a company. The general view is that with particularly with small district councils, it's quite difficult to have the necessary separation of powers in order to operate a company, and it would have to be a properly constituted company. We couldn't just do it as kind of, well, we'll do that and set up a separate account. It has to be a formally registered company, and we'd have to operate through that. Whilst we have the in-house skills by Mark and his team for grounds maintenance, I think operating a management company for estate management is a different thing. This is not just maintenance of ground, you know, of open space necessarily. So again, it might be something we can look at potential options. My initial view is I think it's probably not our area of expertise in its entirety of running a management company as opposed to just undertaking grounds maintenance. But yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Two or three questions, please. I thought that the developers owned the land, that the management company were in a company set up purely and simply to cut the grass and look after it. Therefore, they would have no rights to any of the things that they're cutting. That's the land would still belong to the developers and not to do with the people that are the management company. Have we actually seen a copy of the management agreement which people have signed when they actually took on their properties? The reason why I ask is people say, oh, new house, sign here, sign here, sign here. And that is exactly what I believe they've done, not realising that there is this charge which is coming down the line for them. Now, I can also understand that we as a district council have to protect our interests, but have we party got a copy of their management agreement that the people have signed to have a look and see what clauses are written into there to protect, for a better word, the actual management company who are actually carrying out these works?
Well, I haven't actually seen a copy of the agreement personally, but what I can say is that the management agreements do actually vary depending upon the company and the area. And what I would also say is that when an individual actually purchases a house, it is the responsibility of the conveyancing solicitor to actually advise that the property that you're actually buying is actually subject to a service charge, explain the details of the service charge, and also go through the management agreement. So I think it is also important to actually understand that, whilst we are actually indicating it's so important to, protect the public, when they actually acquire the land, are or should be properly advised as to exactly what they are actually acquiring. That's not the council's responsibility, because that then becomes a private property transaction. So the answer to your question is I haven't seen an agreement, but it's the responsibility of the individual solicitor. But this is where what we are now saying is that we want to actually ensure that there are very robust management agreement proposals which are actually set out in the agreement itself. So we know upfront, we know at the boiler end exactly what our expectation is of that management company. Something that we haven't actually done, historically, because perhaps we've been too trusting of management companies. But now, the agreement needs to ensure, exactly what needs to be done. The management specification needs to be so detailed. And, we're working on, clauses which actually stipulate that when the land is transferred to the management company, this is the management specification that should be annexed. So we know all this information up front.
Just going back to that, you use the phraseology when the land is transferred to the management company.
Yes.
It is. Am I wrong that that I still believe that the land belongs to the developer? It is the responsibility for maintaining the ground. Are you telling me that actually the management company will take over and own that land?
It does actually vary. There are some estates where the land continues to be owned by the developer, and there are some estates where the management company is a separate legal entity, the land is actually transferred. So there's no consistency or set rule. We have situations which actually contain both scenarios. The developer owns on some estates, and on some other estates where the land is actually transferred. That really is dependent upon who the developer is and whether the developer wants to transfer the land to a management company.
Okay, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If a management company proves to be not up to the job over a long term of discharging their contract, is there a mechanism by which the council can then remove that contract and in the meantime run it themselves until such a time or until such a time as another management company is found to take over? Thank you.
Well, Council, there isn't any provision at the moment, but again, it's matters like that we need to, go into detail and consider, what mechanisms can we actually put, in the agreement, that if the specifications are not followed, to what extent are our powers of enforceability, bearing in mind that, you are now dealing with a third party with whom the council hasn't actually got a contract. So again, it's scenarios that we need to look at to see, how we can, sort of chip away at having more and more control, because it's a very legitimate concern, because those concerns have been raised where management companies have not carried out their duties. So it is important to see to what extent we can now build in further controls.
Councillor Harrison.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. in what I hope isn't uncharacteristic, but might be branded as such, attempt to be helpful. I just wondered whether there was possibility of exploring more the potential for setting up a joint venture company with someone who does have the expertise in running management companies between the council and an independent company, because that seems to me a way where we could give a lot of reassurance around many of the issues that we've just been discussing. That's it. Thank you.
I think with a lot of the suggestions tonight, we probably don't have the immediate answer. It's certainly something we can take away and consider and discuss with cabinet members before any formal decision is issued.
Okay, I've got 2 more speakers, and then really after that, I think I'm going to close it down. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. I think if there'd been a management charge for Purton at the time when for maintaining the open spaces, and we have the most open space, which I'd openly acknowledge, our houses would have been more expensive to buy than the ones, for instance, with a village with less open space. And I think that would have disadvantaged our residents in the new dwelling scheme. So the question really is, public open space to me has always been open to all public. I'm interested to see if there's a legal difference between public open space and open space. Is there a legal difference between those two things? And I want to express my concern that we're creating different communities. It's a moral issue, really. The burden is spread across us all. We all understand it. And I think it's a moral issue, really, to try to maintain that and make our housing as affordable as possible for the people who want to develop it. And I'll also point out that some developers in our area did not even hand their area over back to the district council. We have still got some unadopted paths, for instance, in Purton. So there have been various historic things that have caused me quite some concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I move on to Councillor Victor Perry, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back to section 7.1. It says that the council of a 106 agreement to draft in a way that the council is flexible in making the decision whether to require the setting up of a management company. Now, we've already identified by Councillor Harper-Willis that, and Lorraine says, we haven't got the expertise to that. So are we looking at hiring a company to do it or setting up on our own doing it? Is clarification point 1. Point 2 is that 7.2 clearly states that the considered the most appropriate vehicle for delivering the maintenance of open space of the 106. In broad terms, are we saying, are they going to be covering just the cutting of the grass or what management companies do in whole? Because they do a lot more things than just cutting of the grass.
If I can come back on that, what actually the recommendation state at present is that if it's looking to be transferred to a management company, we don't set up that management company. We control the management company in terms of what it says by virtue of what Pardip's been saying in terms of the controls and the setting out and agreeing of it. But that, apart from the conversation we've had this evening in terms of could we do JVC, and which we'll obviously have to explore, but that's not that wasn't the purpose, the initial purpose of the recommendation. So no, it wasn't for us. Unless obviously we're taking it on ourselves and taking it in as part of our asset, but that we'd have those controls. Sorry, your second part of the question. Yeah. No. Yeah. So the management company and section 106 would define exactly, and the actual articles relating to the management company would have to set that up, and that's exactly what we're saying. We'd have to be very specific, a lot more specific than's been done historically, so that we would be able to tie down exactly in terms of it's cutting the grass, it's cutting the open space, and maintaining those areas, whatever's appropriate, and it will be different for each case, but it will be dealt on each case
depending on the nature of the site, the requirement of open space, etc.
Okay then, members. There are 3 recommendations. By the way, can I just thank you? You give that a really good coat of looking at, and you've given plenty of feedback for the cabinet to go back and consider what it is they want to do. But there are 3 recommendations. I'm not going to read them out. They're set out at 7.1, 7.2 and 7.3. Are we at least content with those, please?
I think ultimately the idea of bringing it to scrutiny so members have the opportunities you've had tonight to raise those issues and those ideas, if you like, which the cabinet members will take on board before issuing a decision, because ultimately this is a cabinet decision. So it's been brought to scrutiny rather than potentially wait for it to be called in. So members have made those comments, those ideas. We as officers, along with cabinet members, will have further discussions and then ultimately the cabinet members will issue a final decision on this, but ultimately it is a cabinet decision.
No, I'm sorry. No, we've actually you've had the definition of what it is we're supposed to be doing, and really you've given all that information. It's coming back to the cabinet. They will now decide if and what they want to do coming forward. It's not our decision to make. So you've had the 3 recommendations, and I know if you're not happy with them, that's fine, and you can express that opinion. But we really have got to move forward.
Point of order, Chairman. Can I just...
Excuse me, point of
order.
Yeah, but what point of order? What number?
The point of order is, Lorraine, at this meeting, can a counter proposal be made to what's on the table, or an alternative proposal be made to the recommendation that's on the paper?
It's not really for... In effect, this is a scrutiny committee, so you have scrutinised the proposal. As I say, normally, if a cabinet member was making a decision, it would go out, it would be subject to call-in, it would then come to our view and scrutiny where members would have this debate, but ultimately it would go back to the relevant cabinet member to issue that decision. So you have scrutinised it and it will go back. So it's not a matter of proposing an alternative recommendation. You've put forward your ideas for scrutiny via this scrutiny meeting. Cabinet members will take those into account, but will ultimately issue their decision because it's been subject to scrutiny this evening, which is the idea of bringing it.
Can I just reassure members that the purpose of this meeting this evening, or this particular item here tonight, was to hear this feedback, and I just want to reassure members that I, as a cabinet member, will take all of your considerations back. Of course, we have to discuss this with the cabinet and with the other cabinet member who is obviously absent at the moment. You know, we do have to balance, as has been said a few times this evening, you know, the requirements of the residents versus the burden onto the council. But if I can just reassure members that, you know, we will take your, and I've made a note of nearly every single question except for the ones that are duplicated, and I will make it my endeavour to sort of shape and refine this so that we've got something that's workable. Thank you very much for your feedback.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item 7, member working groups 2024 to 2025. Mr. Faust.
Thank you. Thank you, members. My battery on my computer has died, so I'm now going to do this from memory. The topics before you tonight were suggested to be your place member working group to continue on climate change. The group felt that that was an ongoing matter rather than a task and finish matter, so it suggested that's taken forward. The other one is in respect of artificial intelligence. It's a developing area for everybody, but for local government as well. But we want to absolutely make sure that members have input into and shape what the AI offer would be for this authority. So it's suggesting those 2 groups, departing from the normal 3 groups, because we're aware that members are being required or being invited to attend a number of waste-based workshops and sessions, normally that would have potentially been another member working group, but we wanted to involve all members in that. So rather than running it as a member working group, we've run it as a member briefing session. So we're suggesting just the 2 member working groups for this year. But as always, if members have any further suggestions, we're happy to take those on board.
Councillor Harper-Wallis.
Really happy to see a working group for AI. For members' benefit, I work as a technical project manager for an AI consultancy. So I have some really good experience and sort of an offer and reaching across the floor. I'd be happy to help chair or vice chair that working group and bring my expertise. There's a lot of charlatans about in AI, and there's a lot of risk for local councils, particularly in terms of safety, as well as just generally being ripped off. It's quite a knowledge-rich subject matter, so happy to offer my services and really happy to see it on the working groups. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions? No, well, there's a recommendation at 7.1 for members to consider and agree the topics for examination by the member working groups for the current municipal year. Are we all content with that? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 8. Gosh, I've run out of room. I've got so many names on this piece of paper. Work programme, Mrs. Fox.
Members, the papers before you, it's the updated work programme. There was an additional item tonight on the open spaces, which obviously we've aired. And then the only other change to bring to members' attention is, again, in respect of waste. Originally, it was planned to come to your 8th of October meeting. It doesn't fit in with the timetable for going out for tender for it to come to that meeting. So we're suggesting an additional meeting just to look at the waste contract issue to be held on the 12th of November. So with members' agreement and chairman's agreement, that will go into members' diaries. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any questions? No? There is a recommendation 7.1 that members note the updated work programme for the 2024-25 municipal year. Are we all content with that? Okay, thank you for that. Well, that concludes our meeting. Can I thank you for your considerable contributions and attendance? And I presume my dinner's gone by now, although, but thank you very much. And at 8:50, I formally close the meeting.